Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we believe mental illness can be temporary and transformative. Stay tuned for innovative, effective tools from experts in the field of mental health. Hosted by Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist. This podcast aims to change the narrative around mental illness. Move from a place of fear to a place of hope and solutions. Here on Your Mind.
Laura McKowen had a long, successful career in public relations and the madman-esque drinking culture of advertising. After getting sober, she quickly became recognized as a fresh voice in recovery, beloved for her soulful and irreverent writing online and in print. She now leads sold-out retreats and courses, teaching people the how-to of saying yes to a bigger life. She lives outside Boston, Massachusetts with her daughter. Hello.
How are
Made
you?
it. I am nervous. How are you?
You're nervous? Why?
Well, I have a fabulous author on the video call that I've never met before, and I'm supposed to do an interview that looks and sounds professional. And
Oh, I'm easy.
that's good.
I'm not a reason to be nervous. You know my mom.
I only went to high school with her, like
Yeah,
probably
but you know
grade
who you
school
are.
and high school with her.
Grade
And-
school and high school?
Probably. I mean, we it was not that big a high school.
Right.
You know, and so I was one of the many young men who had crushes on your mom and other people like that. She was one of the intelligent, attractive females in the high school.
Yeah.
And so we weren't like close friends, but we had several
Friends in common or something.
mutual friends. Like my best friend ever in the whole world was somebody who was a really good friend of your mom,
Who?
Frank Francioli.
Oh, yeah. Right.
And Frank and I became like best friends there's a long range debate. Was it sixth grade? Was it fifth grade? We don't know. But we stayed very good friends all the way through high school.
Mhm.
And so I wouldn't count myself one of your mom's really good friends, but I had enough connections of good friends that were very close to her that,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. I told her I forwarded the email that you had sent, and she was so tickled by that. And
It's a small world story.
it's a small world story. And, she's married to Derek Regal now. I don't know if you know that or Derek.
Yeah, well, we went to high school together.
Right. So, yeah, it's small. It's a small world.
Yeah, I what I usually do with these interviews, I have a hard stop at 11. I've got to get on the internet show that I do. I haven't spoken to you before, but I think I tried to communicate in the email that we're doing this because I'm volunteering my time to this group that's a not-for-profit.
Yeah.
And they're trying to help rewrite the narrative on mental health to one in
Yes.
which optimal health and well-being is possible and expected. And
I love that.
and as I've been doing this series, this is a year since we launched.
Wow.
And I like to start with a question like, so tell us how you got into the work you're doing and what drives your passion. But that seems like a really awkward question because we're going to talk about this book, which tells them all of that.
Yeah. I mean, I can answer that, but go in however you want to go in. Right. Because the book is really the story of how I got to be doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. And the, I'm looking at the lauramcgowan.com and the book.
Uh-huh.
And, the fact that Glennon Doyle is your top endorser, I'm nervous.
Stop.
Well, she's just.
Yeah, she's good.
Well, your book and her book are two books that I have recommended to people
Oh, that's
a lot because of the honesty piece.
Yeah, you mean Untamed, her recent
book Untamed, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, she's we've known each other because of the online world. But like years and years ago, but really because of sobriety, because that's one of the things we have in common. And she's been very kind and supportive of my work. It's really nice.
Well, and I tell people that, as a psychologist with 46 years experience doing therapy, when I refer a book to them and the person is a surprising sober life, what do you mean? I'm not a drunkard. Well,
right.
The reason these two books, both yours and the Untamed book, gets a high recommendation from me is because each of you have found in your own ways and write very eloquently about the need for a deep, profound honesty. So we shouldn't keep talking about that. We should start the interview. I wanted to give you a little bit of that because I want you to know that my focus with your book is not 12 steps and an adjunct to the 12 steps. It's about anybody. As a matter of fact, I have somebody that I know and I said, hey, you're an intelligent, high-functioning woman. I'm going to be interviewing Laura. What do you have any questions? And she wrote back this, lovely, I'm stumped, I'm shocked, I feel like I'm letting you down. They don't have this great question, the whole I'm the imposter kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then in the middle of it, she wrote what for me is the key, which is why I recommend this book to people. And she said, I realize I may be still so awestruck about Laura by hearing how similar her addiction sounds to some of the challenges I'm facing. That's still rather unbelievable to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's that, it's like you talk about in the book. It doesn't matter what my thing is. All right. If I'm avoiding my thing, or if I'm using my thing to avoid the pain I need to face, I'm in the same boat, right? I'm in the same hot mess. So
sounds good. Yeah. No, I don't see addiction. I mean, we can talk about, I don't see it as being all that unique. That's the thing one of the things that kind of drives me crazy about alcohol addiction, drug addictions. Like it's seen as this really different thing, and it's just not.
Well, so thank you so much for being here. It's a delight to finally see you face to face.
Yes, you too. I loved the invite, and I love the person we know in common, and I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I'm honored. Where are you joining us from?
I'm on the North Shore of Boston, where the sun is actually shining today, which is the first time in many days. And I feel very lucky because the much of the country right now is in this frozen place. And usually we've got the worst of the weather, but it's gratefully okay today.
Well, I'm honored that you're willing to talk to us about your book and your work, because it is, it's a life changer.
Thank you.
I remember reading Glennon Doyle saying that this is a life-changing book. It's going to save lives. So get us going any way you want, but share.
Sure. Yeah. I guess I could talk about, what my reason for writing the book. And I didn't start out as a writer. I was a big reader and lover of words, but I had a whole career in marketing and advertising and a different life, really. And it'll be 5 years this year that I quit my job. But what the changing event for me was really falling down the rabbit hole of alcohol addiction and climbing my way out. And everything I learned and am still learning about that process, is a very classic dark night of the soul situation, except the dark night was a couple of years long and replete with that, story is the wisdom that you come out with. And for me, that, meant seeing my addiction, my circumstances as not really being that unique, that we all have something that confronts us to the degree that, I shouldn't say everyone, but my experience is most people have something, at least one thing in their life that confronts them at the soul level, all the way through, where none of the sort of coping mechanisms you've had or your skills or your experience can get you out of it. And you have to surrender to it or you have the choice to surrender to it to be transformed. And that transformation is such an opportunity and such a massive gift if you allow yourself to go through it.
Well, you mentioned the dark night of the soul, and there's a book, The Way of Mastery, that talks about it and says it's really the dark night of the ego and the rebirth of the soul, or the awakening of the soul.
I love that.
And it's the willingness to face what I've been running away from that is so critical, that comes so clearly in your beautiful writing.
Yeah, the dark night of the ego. I've been doing a lot of thinking about the ego and how so much of our pain comes from this idea about ourselves.
And mostly it comes from, when you think about it at these deeper levels, most of our pain comes from either exalting the ego or fighting it. And, it serves a role. It's there to help us navigate the world. If I didn't have that kind of memory, I wouldn't remember how to get back to my house tonight when I'm done with work. Right. But when I think that's all I am, or if I elevate that to some high standard, or if I am horrified by what my ego tells me about who I am, either one, I'm in prison.
Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it, because I think a lot of times we just think of the former, the ego sort of being inflated and running the show. But my experience was more of just being horrified about the story I had about myself, right? So much shame and so much regret and guilt, and just feeling like there's something deeply wrong with you. It's an ego inflation too, right? It just manifests in, I think my experience is people seem to go one way or the other, and
sometimes flip back and forth between them.
Yeah, it's the whole, I don't know if you curse on this, but it's like one of the aphorisms that I heard in the recovery program, that one of them that I use was that, you feel like you're the piece of crap at the center of the universe. And that's sort of the cycle that I was in for, I think until I wasn't, maybe from the beginning of childhood. I don't know.
Well, I've had a couple people I've referred the book to, and they've come back, and one of the pieces that strikes them is your whole talk about learning to be honest with yourself first at deeper and deeper levels, and then eventually others. And one person was telling me that just rereading the part about calling your friends after you've had lunch with them to admit, I didn't really see that movie, or I didn't really, so many people would consider just nitpicky or unnecessary. Can you talk a little bit about what that process was like for you and why it's so valuable to be honest at those deeper levels?
Yeah. It's the chapter that gets brought up the most often, which I find interesting. So one of the things, the main thing maybe that I had to learn as a result of getting sober and getting healing and getting more well is to be honest. And it was kind of like, it was a surprise to me, because we know when we are outright lying, deceiving someone, but there's all these other ways that we're dishonest. And I knew I had become a liar, like I knew the ways that I was lying all the time. I mean, mostly to protect the drinking, and the things I had done because of my drinking. I had all kinds of lies going on with all kinds of people. But then there's this layer that's more about people pleasing. And not really, I look at it as like being out of alignment, where what you're thinking and what you're saying and what you're doing are all very different things, right? So I wouldn't tell people what I would really think, because for many reasons, I wanted them to like me. I wanted to make a connection with them. I didn't want them to be angry. I wanted to avoid conflict. Like, that was my MO. And it seems like in those moments, because we call it people pleasing, and it's this very sort of socially acceptable way of being, especially for women, I find that we don't consider it dishonesty, but it creates all this friction inside of us, right? Because it showed up in my relationships. I mean, I had all these struggles in my relationships where I would just avoid conflict, little white lie here, little white lie there. Sure, I don't mind doing that. Yes, that's fine. I'll commit to plans that I know I can't do because I don't want to say no. It goes on and on and on. And you build this over years, right? Years and years and years. And then something happens and I explode. It's like the exploding doormat syndrome, and it causes this big disruption in a relationship because I had been teaching people all along, or presenting something different all along. I hadn't been honest about how I felt or what I thought. So I had to learn how to do this, though. It's not something you go, oh, because it seems obvious, like, oh yeah, of course, you just start telling the truth. But for most people, it's extraordinarily difficult because you're changing the terms of your relationships writ large, right? And that is one of the most confronting things we can possibly do. So I had to really be on to myself. And like you mentioned, silly things like having a conversation with new friends, say new sober friends, and talking about a movie and saying I saw the movie when I never saw the movie. Like, why did I say that? It's because I want to make a connection with them. That's why. I want to have some common ground, right? But in the past, I would just let that go and just go, oh, whatever. And what I started to do in sobriety, because I watched these other women do it, is call myself out to say, I don't know why I did that. I don't know why I just lied. I just lied about that. That's so ridiculous. And then there's one instance where you're kind of in alignment, right? And you start to build those up and build those up and build those up. And what eventually over time happens for me is that what I'm thinking and what I'm saying and what I'm doing are much more in alignment. And there's that, for me, that means I don't have anything to hide, right?
I love the point at the end of chapter 10 where you're talking about the day that you realized it had changed and you were walking and there was just your feet on the pavement and the chewed up carrot in your mouth and the sun, and there wasn't all of this racing in your head.
Yeah.
And to get there, I've had experiences with different people where it's such a blessing to have a tribe or a community of people, however small, where you can agree to do that.
Yeah.
There's the book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, and they talk in there about that openness, that level of honesty. And when I was reading that chapter, even though at times I consider myself a very honest person, I found myself recoiling from that chapter, like, I wouldn't do that, not with those people.
I'm not going to take it that far.
Yeah, right? I mean, like, well, I don't have to talk about that stuff. And yet another part of me knows that's the only way through.
Yeah, right. And you, as someone who deeply understands mental health and the risks of lying, the risks of secrecy and lying, even you struggle with it, right? So someone with maybe less experience and knowledge, of course, we all struggle with that because I thought if people really knew who I was, they wouldn't want me around, that would be the end of it. And there was also I had, anyone who goes through addiction, and not just addiction, but that's my experience, has, you have some secrets, you have some shameful stuff that you've either felt or done or both, right? And for me, I did not think that it was possible for me to tell the truth about that and still live. Like, I really didn't. I thought I will take all of that to the grave because it's just, no one can know that stuff.
So did you have overt agreements with certain people that you were just going to start being really honest and don't worry about it if I call you after a conversation and out myself, or did you just start doing it?
Great question. So built into the 12-step program, which I did for a while, and it was a very good foundation, built into that culture and is a stated radical honesty, rigorous honesty, right? And so the women that I met in there, I watched them, how they were honest with each other. And I started to do that slowly on my own terms with just one or two people, right? It started there. And then with other sober people. So my experience, whether it was an overt thing, I mean, yeah, I guess it was, because it's like you're with them, you're connecting with them for a purpose because you both want to get better, right? Whether it's a sponsee or just fellow traveler type of situation, you both have a common goal, and you have learned or have heard that being honest is part of it. And when you're desperate enough to get better, you're willing to kind of, okay, I'll try it, right? And for everyone, it's a little bit different. We all have our own, one of the things that kept me drinking for a really long time was that I couldn't be honest. I just couldn't. I could not tell people the last time I drank because I had, 100 times over said I was never going to do it again. And it was just too much shame and too embarrassing. But finally, the death of the ego, it's like, well, I can hold on to this, or I can jump off the cliff and start to tell the truth with people and see what happens. And it's also not this, like, I think a lot of people think, oh, if I'm going to do this, I have to start telling the truth with everybody and everybody needs to know everything about me. And it's like, no, somebody eventually needs to know everything about you. But it's you're allowed to have privacy too. I think that's an important thing to say. It was an important thing for me to hear because I wasn't going to be, telling everyone everything. So I want to answer your question though, the overt thing. I mean, I also had been in therapy for years and I'd never told the truth there. I just couldn't do it. And I'm sure you experience that all the time. But it was like, I tried it out there too. I practiced. It took practice. And then what I started to learn is in a few friendships, in a few new relationships with sober people, I started to build that muscle and see what happened. And what the return was for me was actual connection and intimacy that I'd never had before, right? And I had pushed away and kept everything at a distance, and that's
quite a shock to the system.
Totally, and not all great. It's kind of confronting, but it helped. Like, it helped tremendously. In the book I talk about like one stranger who understands your experience. Just even a stranger, a person sitting in a recovery meeting or even online or whatever that understands your experience can do for you what hundreds of family and friends can't. We need people who understand our experience exactly. But it just takes one. It just takes one.
But to get that, I have to be honest about my experience.
Right. Yeah, that's the bad news.
and I want to reinforce what you just said about how privacy is okay, and I have a lot of people that come into my office and they don't get what you mean, privacy, secrecy. You're telling me that, secrets keep us sick. And I say, oh yeah, and that's true. Because if there's 10 units of mental energy that I use to hide the fact that there's candy in my drawer, and I'm trying to present myself as a health coach, that 10 units of mental energy is also going to feed the conclusion in me that I'm damaged, I'm broken.
Right.
And if whoever it is finds out that there's candy in the drawer or whatever the secret is, they'll either attack me or run away from me.
Totally.
And so I feed the conclusion deep within myself that I'm damaged and broken every time I keep any kind of a secret.
Yeah.
So imagine how convoluted, how much energy I would have to spend to convince people that, unlike the rest of you humans, I don't have to eat or drink or use the bathroom. I'm not a sexual being. I'm more like a god here among, the little ants.
A mere mortal.
Imagine how much energy I would have to expend to make sure no one ever saw me actually consume a beverage or food or use the bathroom or whatever. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
But at the same time, while I am not trying to pretend that I don't have to use the bathroom or that I'm not a sexual being, I tell my patients, hopefully you will never pull up to have a session and find me out in the parking lot with my pants around my ankles doing my thing.
Yeah, hopefully.
It's private, right? There's all kinds of things.
That's a great way to put it.
As long as I'm honest with myself, I don't have to be public with it to everybody else. It's the damage I do in here with my secrecy, with my conclusion that I have to hide this from somebody.
Yes.
As opposed to, I'm going to choose to share with these people and not share with those people. But I know the truth of it.
Yes.
And if I'm reading your book accurately, it's whatever I use to deny that truth, hide it from myself, and then try to hide it from others, that is my thing.
It's your thing. And
that creates my problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And it requires relief of some kind, because it was never about the alcohol itself. It's never about the sex or the alcohol or the whatever, the gambling, the money, those are the things that we have to use to alleviate the pain of our dislocation from ourselves. And it's extraordinary pain. And what I say now, what I learned in sobriety was I can't stomach that dislocation. I can't deal with it anymore. If I have that, I start to get very sick very fast, and that will require relief. And I've had many learning moments in sobriety of coming up against this again and again, right?
Well, and it's the hook that the secrecy is the seed of my illness, and I keep feeding it and nurturing it without realizing it. And that the only solution to it is the profound honesty. And I have hidden and been coached by the culture and my family to believe that honesty is going to kill me.
Absolutely.
Like you said, I'm not going to survive telling these people that.
No. I mean, speaking for me, like I'm talking about, okay, I'm married to someone and I'm not being faithful, and I have all these very real things going on in the background that if they are found out, my life will explode. Right. So it's anything from that to like hiding bottles around the house, like nobody, or taking little extra sips of, vodka, that, those things that seem maybe smaller, maybe not to someone who doesn't participate in that kind of behavior, but like that seems sort of like, okay, I just get to have my little secret. But then there are also big secrets. And what you said about the units of energy, like that, it only compounds. One secret begets another secret and another secret and another secret. It's just the way it works. And it grows like a virus until you're fully sick.
Right. And they feed the conclusion that you're damaged and broken.
Yeah. And I'd never heard it explained that way. And it's so perfect. Like that's the actual.
It's a mechanism.
Yeah. Right.
I can't hide something unless I'm operating and feeding the conclusion that if the person I'm hiding this from finds out about it, it's going to go badly. They're either going to attack me or run away from me. And as you said, it's that connection that, allows us to grow and nurture. It's the intimacy that so many people are not familiar with and feel so awkward at first, but it's the thing that gives us the true strength.
Yeah. And that's huge, especially everyone, like a lot of people have significant trauma or even just, they've been taught and their families are in culture that who they are isn't okay, and so it is absolutely as deep as if I do this, I will die instinct that you have to work through slowly and test again and test again and try. But it's possible, I don't have things to hide anymore. I don't, like, what I say is that there's one version of me, right? It's not that I'm going to show up with you the same way I show up with my boyfriend and with my work colleagues, but there's one version inside. Whereas before it was like completely different Laura's, and what you knew about what I was up to and was totally different. It would be a complete shock to my husband, say, like, I don't know what story you're getting, but it's very different than the story I have. And that's just more of what we talked about, to hold up all those different versions of yourself is really painful and exhausting.
It takes so much energy to try and keep them all straight and remember who I'm supposed to be with this group or that group. Whereas
who have I told what?
Yeah. And the other thing is the fear of discovery is exhausting. Yeah. It's a tremendous amount of energy spent on fighting the fear.
Oh God, that was my life. All the way back from being a kid, before I was drinking, there was stuff that little secrets that I started keeping for myself that I was afraid of being found out for.
Well, and as you say, I think you pointed out, I know Glennon Doyle pointed out that the culture doesn't have us talking about all of this stuff. We have these socially acceptable addictions and cover-ups and facades. Mm-hmm. We move some of them from the level of acceptable up to idealized.
Oh, absolutely. Totally. Workaholism or overworking and body stuff.
Yeah. Never going out without makeup, always making sure that the pictures are photoshopped and, we got to have it look this way or that way. And we actually have a culture that doesn't realize, or if it does, there's no big mechanism behind it. But we've stumbled into this where we're training ourselves to be fake at every different level.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and then there's the whole social media aspect, which is so heavy on my mind all the time because I have an 11-year-old who's, begging to be on there. And it's just so clear to me how distorted, how much it's changed not just our perceptions, but like our brains, the way we process the world. So that's a rabbit hole, but it feeds that, it feeds that idea that something is wrong with us, I think, constantly. Like, I would love to hear what you think about this, but, as I understand it, the purpose of healthy shame is to keep you from acting too weird that you get exiled from your tribe, in very basic terms. And most of the shame that we experience is applied, like other people's standards of what we should be and how we should act and all that. But up until 10 years ago, maybe even less, our sort of circle of concern, whose opinions we were even privy to, was still relatively small, right? But now it's opened up to essentially the world, right? I mean, I have an Instagram following where I can get 75,000 people's opinions. And it's just absolutely impossible for us to psychologically handle the judgment and feedback of that big of a circle of concern.
And as you said, it's just so weighty. It's so overwhelming. I used to tell people for decades now, I've told people, turn off what they call the news. Because it's not the news.
All the news is
it's the worst of the worst stuff from around the globe. It's the most sensationalized stuff. And the purpose of it is simply to keep you watching that show. And I tell people, and I've told them for decades, that if you knew everything that was going on in the town you live in, all of
Oh,
the horrors, all of the wonderful stuff, all of the mundane stuff, you would be filled with joy and hope. And
yeah.
when something unpleasant happened, you'd get in your car and drive over to the neighbor and
Oh,
deliver a meal or share a bedspread if their house burned down, or, start one of the projects to, raise the barn, put the barn up again or whatever, and
yes,
you'd feel empowered. But
yes.
when you hear these things from around the globe, the worst of the worst, that you don't have any control over, and unless you're somebody with, billions of dollars in logistics resources, and then, send them a loving thought and redirect, because there's stuff going on in your life that you do have some ability to have an impact on. And it's that thing gets amplified, as you're talking about with the social media. How can you please everybody, even just everybody in your town? You can't. How can you please?
You can barely please the people in your home.
Exactly. How can you please, 3.5 million people who follow you on this media or that? And so there's great wisdom in what you're saying, that it's an impossible task. It's the proverbial tilting at windmills to say, I'm going to please somebody.
That's the second time that has come up and I never heard the tilting at windmills before until a week ago. And it is like my favorite expression now. It's so good. Tilting at windmills.
Don Quixote, to dream the impossible dream.
So yeah, no, this is very helpful to just hear, because this is really what's at the top of my mind right now, and what's causing me an extraordinary amount of just pain and difficulty is living online a lot. And, it's a sobriety practice for me too. And I don't know that there's some people talking about that, but for me, it's almost like drinking, like the idea that we should be able to moderate social media is, I don't know if it's actually possible, at least from my experience. So it's helpful to hear you talk about that as something you've been talking to people about for a long time.
Well, and the people that take me up on it come back and say, it's amazing. I don't pour all of this negative stuff in morning, noon, and night. And I have connected more with what's going on in my town,
Right.
and finding out about the high school students who are creating not-for-profits or delivering meals to people, and, helping the homeless. And the fundamental truth of it is that, yes, there are all of these negative things going on. I'm not saying that the news is making stuff up. I'm not one of those people.
Yeah.
Right. I'm saying that
So there are real problems.
Right. And there are floods, and there are bombings, and there are rapes, and all of this that happens.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is, there's far more good going on in every moment by exponential,
Yeah. God,
levels.
you wouldn't feel that way, right? You wouldn't feel that way.
You wouldn't feel that way if what you're doing is watching what they call the news. But the fact of the matter is, if what was going on in the world was just what they show you, we would have annihilated ourselves centuries ago.
So true. My gosh. So true. And I think it's been exacerbated by COVID, because we're sort of forced indoors, right? And, or at least personally speaking, and you spend more time staring into screens, right? But the issue, I think, on the other side, or, I have thought this many times, go in and pay attention more to what's right in front of your face. But then it's like, well, how, am I just burying my head in the sand? How am I contributing to the betterment of society if I'm doing that? And what you've said and what I have found is that you actually are only able to contribute when you focus on what's in front of you. You actually, for me, it's paralyzed me. It's stopped me, because it's actually impossible to solve the problems that you're being presented with. Racial injustice. Like, where do you begin as a person?
In here.
Right. Right.
That's, and so if I love the wisdom from Maury Schwartz. He wrote, he was kind of co-author with Mitch Albom in the book Tuesdays with Maury.
Yeah. That was.
And at one point, Mitch asks him, Maury, how do you do it? I mean, you've never sung a note on tune in your entire life. You dance like somebody's hit you with a cattle prod, but you go out on the dance floor and you like you don't care. And Maury said, well, Mitch, if you live in a culture that doesn't leave you feeling good about yourself, you need to create your own culture. And so even with the online communities, I encourage people to be highly selective about how much time they spend with who. And so if you're someone like you who has a business going and, as Glennon Doyle says, you have a book that's saving lives, it's a useful tool to get your book out there and have people find out about it. But that doesn't mean you need to read every one of the 75,000 comments, right? If you do your best and put it out there and let people have their responses, or you pay somebody a little bit to do a cursory review for you, so they're getting the wave, and they can tell you, well, on whole it's positive but some negative, or here's one thing you could correct. So you're not trying to do it all yourself. And then
feel like this has turned into a therapy session for me.
Well, but it's just really good advice for all of us, right?
Yeah,
to be selective. There's that book Tribe that talks about how in community we handle so much differently. But when we are isolated, we fall back into these very, very negative patterns.
Yeah.
And we don't have the intimacy, and we don't have the validation, and we start doubting ourselves, and it gets to be a negative spiral.
Yeah. I'm just reminding myself to pick up Tribes and Tuesdays with Maury again. I have it back there somewhere, but I haven't read those for a while, and they're really good reinforcers of these ideas.
Well, so, if we've got 10 minutes left, we could push it to maybe, I guess 10. I have another thing I have to do.
Oh yeah, you do.
But what is this, if you do take a breath and get centered, what's something about this book or your work that we haven't even touched on yet you want to make sure to put out there for people?
Yeah. So the interesting thing for me, and what is actually going to be the second book, which I'm writing right now, is the little epigraph at the beginning of the book. It's 9 things. And it came from a woman wrote me, and her sister was really struggling with addiction, and she just didn't know what to do. She didn't know what to tell her. And I wrote this long response, but at the end of it was this list. And the list is 1, it's not your fault. 2, it is your responsibility. 3, it is unfair that this is your thing. 4, this is your thing. 5, this will never stop being your thing until you face it. 6, you can't do it alone. 7, only you can do it. 8, you are loved. And 9, I will never stop reminding you of these things. And only some people caught on to that, notice the epigraph. But to me, it's like, that is the entire book, the sort of arc of the book. And it's also the instruction that I give to myself and I would give to anybody when they're confronting their thing, whatever it is, right? Those sort of 9 things, and they work together. There's a lot of paradox in there. It's like, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. You can't do it alone, and only you can do it. And, exploring those 9 things is really what I'm interested in doing now, and not specifically as it relates to addiction, although it includes that, but just as humans that go through our stuff. Your thing can be someone dying. It can be a divorce. It can be having a child go through, as I am, the preteen years, which is more excruciating than I ever imagined. Just so that's the thing that I'm thinking about a lot, and specifically number 1, that it's not your fault, because it kind of goes back to what we've been talking about. If there's something deeply wrong about me, I should be able to get this, do this better.
Right. Well, there's a list of 10 bottom line observations that I give to people in the first session. And I'll be happy to send you a copy. But one of them is, the second one is, I have seen kindergarten age children who are expert at blaming, but I've never seen blame lead to the productive or constructive resolution to a problem. And so I spend time in my own life and certainly in my session with my internal radar going for any indication that somebody's trying to blame themselves or blame somebody else or blame their circumstances for something in their life they don't like. And if that radar goes off, I call a time out and say, listen, why don't you save that for your next vacation where it doesn't matter if you waste your time, but let's get busy doing something that at least has a chance of being productive. And so, the blame, the fault, it isn't, it sounds paradoxical to the way we've been trained, but it isn't paradoxical to say it's not your fault and it is your responsibility. If you look at responsibility, one of my favorite teachers introduced me to the concept of response-ability. It's a tool that I can pick up. And if I pick up that tool and I look at what's happened leading up to this, and I single out my part in it.
Yeah.
Not that I'm to blame or I'm at fault, but I can see what I did.
Am I able to respond with?
Now, if I own what I did that brought me here, now I have the ability to respond differently the next time a similar situation comes up. It's an actual tool. It's not a weapon to use against myself or somebody else.
That's right. That's right. The most profound, the sort of one thing I always fall back on, and I learned it from a woman who has a lot of sobriety and led me in a big way, is that I am responsible for my experience. I'm the one. So if that's true, it frames every single thing, every person, every situation I encounter differently. And it's not the best news it wasn't the best news to me, because it's you have to take that responsibility. And that's not always easy, but man, it in the end, it is the best news.
Right. It's empowering.
Right.
I tell people that you have the infinite capacity to choose the focus of your conscious awareness in each new present moment.
Yeah.
And part two, it's the focus of your conscious awareness in each new present moment that is actually creating your experience of life in that moment.
Right. For a lot of people.
It's right there.
Yeah, it's right there.
I want to highlight something that you talked about. I mean, you just gave a kind of a toss-off comment here when you said, not that it's all about sobriety or alcoholism, but I was asking someone, that's, very intelligent and competent. I said, hey, I'm going to be interviewing Laura. Got any questions for me? And she said, I don't really have a question, but she said, I realize I'm stymied given the question because I'm kind of awestruck. I'm starstruck by this. She said, I realize I may be still so awestruck because of hearing how similar her addiction sounds to some of the challenges I'm facing. Mm-hmm. It's still rather unbelievable to me. So here's a person who has not been struck with one kind of an addiction that you would single out as alcohol or gambling, and yet she found such deep connection and insight in your book.
That is the entire point of my book. It's one of the main points, because for me, when I went to get sober, yes, I had a problem with alcohol, but I was so enraged at this idea that I knew it wasn't just a Laura problem or an alcoholism problem. It was like a meta. I was not different than all of my friends who could quote unquote drink normally. We all had our stuff. And yet I was singled out in this okay, you have a problem that none of us want to talk about. Go in the corner, wherever you need to go, because that's shameful and embarrassing. And quite frankly, we don't want to even look at it, and figure it out with the people who also are so degraded that they have the same problem. Right. there's still this huge stigma. And to me, I luckily I just knew that was complete BS. I just knew it. And it's so much of the reason people stay stuck in drinking, because to admit that you have this problem, this thing, means all these other things, because that's what we've created it to be in society, right? And the primary program for recovery, and this is not a criticism, but it's anonymous. So secrecy, be quiet, that implies this is a shameful thing. You need to not talk about it. You need to go to a place where you talk about that. I get so impassioned about this because that is the entire point of my book. And I'm so grateful that she felt that way, because it's like, yeah, you're not different than me, because
that's right.
My problem results in me stumbling around and looking, it has this sort of icky manifestation.
Yeah. The thing I choose to run away from my problem is different than yours.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make us different.
No, not at all. And it's so freeing to both the people who experience addiction and feel like they're, specifically or especially degraded because of this happens to be their thing, versus, and it's also helpful for people who, like her, who go, oh, like, this is a way of talking about this. And that makes sense to me, but also we all know someone who struggles with addiction. I mean, you don't have to look far, it touches most families. I don't know if you would agree, but
absolutely,
there's a lot more empathy, hopefully, that can be found, and healing that can be found if you go, oh, they're not special, especially broken. They're just the same as I am.
Well, I am delighted and honored that you were willing to have this conversation.
This is so wonderful.
And I really, really would like it if we could do this after your next book comes out. I love those 9 points at the beginning of We Are the Luckiest. People can find out about you at lauramcgowan.com, Laura McGowan Books.
LauraMcKowen.com. It's just my name.com, and everything's there.
Everything's there. It's fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. And I will get back in touch as soon as I find out that you finished that next book.
Please do. Hopefully next year. Okay. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Laura McKowen had a long, successful career in public relations and the madman-esque drinking culture of advertising. After getting sober, she quickly became recognized as a fresh voice in recovery, beloved for her soulful and irreverent writing online and in print. She now leads sold-out retreats and courses, teaching people the how-to of saying yes to a bigger life. She lives outside Boston, Massachusetts with her daughter. Laura writes an award-winning blog and hosted the iTunes Top 100 Home podcast. She has been featured in the New York Times, The Guardian, WebMD, Psychology Today, The Today Show, The Doctors, and more. Laura has an MBA from Babson College and spent 15 years in advertising, managing million-dollar accounts for Fortune 100 companies before transitioning to writing and teaching. She is the founder of several online programs for sobriety and personal development called The Luckiest Club. It's a sobriety support community, and she teaches workshops and retreats all over the United States. Her first book, We Are the Luckiest, The Surprising Magic of a Sober Life, released January of 2020 and was an instant bestseller. Laura is represented by Jamie Carr at The Book Group.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.